So finally, we have reached the point where we're actually going to dive into the dashboard itself. We're going to see how to read the P1 and P2 data. And I want to emphasize that in this video, we're only going to focus on how to read actual data itself. Because when you open the dashboard, there's quite a lot coming at you. There's quite some information. And it might seem a little bit overwhelming, but I promise it's pretty okay to read once you understand how to interpret it. So that's the only thing we're going to focus on in this video. And in later videos, in the following videos, we're gonna see how to actually apply it to RTA and how it's actually gonna benefit us. But for this video, we're just gonna focus on how do we read the P1 and P2 data that is in the dashboard. And we're gonna slowly, gradually go into more and more data and just work our way through all the elements of the dashboard. But before we dive into it, there's one final note I want to make, and that is an important note regarding time zones. And that is all the data you're going to see is calculated on time zone UTC plus 0, right? So all the data you are going to see when we're going to talk about daily data, I'm talking about the day in UTC plus 0. The reason for that being is that candle opens and closes are universally calculated in this time zone. Universally. It doesn't matter which time zone you're in. It doesn't matter which time zone you have your trading view in. Like if you're on UTC -5 on trading view, your daily open will still be calculated based on UTC plus 0. This is why everyone always has the same daily open level. You know, the horizontal that everyone uses, the daily open. It is because the daily open is defined to start at midnight in UTC plus 0. That is universally the daily open. That's also why everyone has the same 4-hour candles, everyone has the same 3-hour candles, everyone has the same 12-hour candles, everyone's looking at the same 12-hour or daily candles, no matter which time zone you're in. It's because universally the trading day just opens at midnight UTC plus 0. So for our statistics, it makes sense that we look at the same time zone. So everything is done in UTC plus 0 or calculated in UTC plus 0. What you can do to make it, in my opinion, a little bit less confusing, although we have a solution for this, as we will see. But you can set your trading view time zone to UTC plus 0. This is what most members do. This is what I do. But even when I'm in different time zones, set it in UTC plus 0. But with that said, the P1, P2 indicator that we've shown displays hours of pivots in this time zone, right? In time zone UTC plus 0. So even if you do not set the trading view time zone to time zone UTC plus 0, then still you can use the P1, P2 indicator and it will display you which hour of the day in UTC plus 0 the pivot was put in. Right, so with that out of the way, let's dive into the actual dashboard itself. And then this is the first thing you will see when you open it. These are also more or less the standard settings. And at first sight, there's probably a lot coming at you. And to keep things simple, we're just going to look at a few things in this video. We're not going to look at everything. For the table itself, which is the first thing I want to cover, I just want you to focus on the column hour, the column P1%, and the column P2%. Forget about the rest. Forget about this P1 change last P1. Forget about P2 change last P2. I forgot about all the other things that you see on the chart, including all the filters. We're going to dive into a couple of them. But for now, I want to talk about just the P1% and P2%. What you see here is a table that shows all the hours in the day, calculated from UTC plus 0 time zone, as mentioned. So this is the first trading hour of the day, second trading hour of the day, right? Hour 0, hour 1. So this is midnight until 1 a.m., 1 a.m. until 2 a.m., 2 a.m. until 3 a.m., and so on and so on. And for every hour of the day, you will see how often P1 was put in. 28.4% of the time it was put in during hour 0. 11.4% of the time it was put in during hour 1. And so on and so on. And here you can see that hour 0 put in P2 0% of the time. And hour 1.3% of the time. It makes sense that this is lower here because, as we know, this is the second pivot of the day, and for it to happen in the first hour, there would have to be some really crazy Darth Vader candlestick price action, and it doesn't happen a lot. So, with this knowledge, we can proceed and look at this chart. And this chart is very much the same as this table. It just represents it differently, right? So what you see here is that 28.4% of the time hour 0 has P1. Right here, light blue, P1. So you can see it here just visually. So here we see visually the representation of this table. So we can see the distribution of how often a certain hour in the day puts in P1 or P2. And the orange line, it's a Pareto style chart. The orange line is the aggregate of P1 plus P2. So basically what you have to see as the blue lines is how often does this hour put in P1. The dark blue line is how often does this hour put in P2. And the orange line is how often does this hour put in P1 or P2. So this orange line is also very important because, and as we'll see later, you can ask yourself the question, how often do we put in a pivot in this hour? So one more thing before we dive into the charts and make that even more clear, I promise it's going to be a lot more clear, is this filter. I want you to understand that this data right here is calculated based on the date range you have selected here. So if I go all the way back and I select from 2018, you will see that this changes. This also changes, right? Because this and this is the same, only visually represented differently. I can slide shorter, and you can just select your time frame in which you want to see what time times P1 and P2 were put in. Again, forget about the P1 change lies P1. We'll get to that in a later video. But so this is very important. We're looking at price for Bitcoin. We could also go look at the data for Bitcoin. We could also look at data for Doge. But for this video, we'll be looking at Bitcoin. And finally, we can also select the weekdays we want the data from. So right now I have Saturday and Sunday excluded because I personally don't trade Saturday and Sunday, but you can include it. You can look at singular days and so on and so on. The important remark I want to make is that here you have to select the days. These are your data points. Right now, this data is calculated based on 551 data points. If I do this, it's calculated on 1368 data points. If I select Saturday and Sunday, it's calculated based on almost 2000 data points. And this is important because what you will see that's why, if you just do Mondays and do a short date range, you will see that, you have 72 data points. And I want you to be cautious with that. So you preferably have these higher rather than lower, because the lower the data points, the less statistically significant conclusions you can draw from the data. There's more room for randomness, right? So personally, I look at singular days sometimes, but I'm very much a fan of looking at Mondays to Fridays and also not selecting this too short, right? You want to have some data to make conclusions on. I personally look at the last 2 years of data, more or less. So with that out of the way, I want to make it a little bit more clear how to look at this by diving into the charts. So here we have a screenshot of the dashboard on a certain time setting. And then, we can see how it relates to chart in time-based fashion is like this. So here we have it in vertical format, right? The hours of the day. You can see here, this relates to each hour of the day, hour 1 until hour 23. And then we can see what the probabilities are to put in the first pivot of the day in each of these hours. And this is not something this is not an indicator or anything. I drew this myself, so it's just for explanation purposes. And here we see the same, where you can see the probability of the second pivot of the day being put in per hour. So this is how you have to interpret the P1, P2 columns. And to make that finally, the last thing I'm going to do very clear is that we're going to dive into the charts. And then we can see here that, and this is not predicting, because this is, the data is actually based on this data. So it makes sense. You're going to see some high probability areas being hit, but this is purely to show you how it, how it works, to get a good idea of how to read it. So this is P1. I loaded it the wrong way. There it is. So if we look at the 50-minute chart, we can see this is the first hour right until here. The second hour is until here, and so on and so on. And we can see actually that today we put in the first pivot at a low probability hour, right? Hour 11, only 1.7% chance that happens. It's just statistics. It's just statistics. So low probability events happen as well, although not that much. In this case, it happened. And then we could do the same for P2, where we look at right here. And again, this is just to give you an idea of how to read this data. And then we can see we put in hour 22, which happens 9.5% of the time for the selected date range, right? It's very important. For the selected date range, 9.5% of the time, it's this area. If you're wondering right now, how can we leverage that data, 9.5%, you're gonna see that in future videos, especially when we get to time adjusted mode. But for now, I just wanna focus on how to read this. So here we can do the same thing. P1 was put in here. And I assume it's this one. Yeah, there you go. So it's put in during the first hour because it's the start of or hour one. It's the start of hour one. So it counts as hour one. So that's when P1 was put in. You can see this kind of is a zone that often gets put in, like together it's almost 50%. And that's very valuable data, as we will see later on. So we also look at these as zones. We group them as well. We'll see that in later videos. But there you have it. And then P2 was right here. And then we can see when was P2 put in. This one. In an hour with 4.4% probability. Also doesn't happen a lot. In the next one, we can just forget about the lines for now. Just skip through, don't want to make it too long. We have it right here. And we can see that was put in during hour one again. We start seeing a pattern. And this one right here, which was put in during hour 16, which is a high probability area. We go on to the next. Right here. Whoops. We can see that the first pivot of the day was put in here during hour 3, 4.3% occurrence. And the second pivot of the day was put in, I think, was it that I have to check? No, this is the new part of the day. It doesn't count. So it was put in here, which was the hour 21, which is 10.4% occurrence. So you can also see that this is the high probability zone. Right? I hope you can see already the clear patterns in here. There's definitely patterns that you can see when these pivots are being put in. And we're going to dive into those patterns a lot more in what's to come. But you can see that this is a zone, this is a high probability zone. And for P2, it's either the same, this high probability zone and this high probability zone. So that's really where you want to be looking for pivots. But we're just going to finish this off. We're just going to finish this off with right here. P1 was put in right here. So during the first hour of the day, I see you have the daily. This is just slightly off, but you get the point. Let me just draw it like that. During the first hour of the day, so the highest probability, 28.1%. And P2 was put in during hour 20, 10.4%. And finally here, again, we have that first pivot during hour 0. And that second pivot was, in this case, during hour 18, which was 6.6% of the time. And this is how you keep going. If we go to current price action, like I said, we don't have to draw this out ourselves, the P1, P2s. We have the Minu Analytics P1 and P2 helper. Again, it's in the Discord. And we can see that it draws for us the daily open, the daily close. Let me just remove the 4-hour data because it's just confusing for now. So right now we can see that we put in P1 during hour 1 and P2 during hour 3. So if I would grab this data right here, let's just do that since we're at it. Then here you go. This is what we have. For the first pivot of the day, this one right here has 11.6% historical occurrence, and this one right here was actually put in at the start of hour 3, so 4.3%. This is what we know now. And again, this is fractal, right? We use multiple time frames. We use top-down statistical analysis, that we like to call it. So here you can see that we also look at the 4-hour, but we're going to get into that in later videos, and you will see it's very powerful to use it on different time frames. But for now, this was just an explanation of how to interpret the P1, P2 data. So I hope it makes sense now how to interpret this, right? The P1 and the P2. In the next video, or the next videos, we're going to look at how to actually apply this to RTA ahead of time, right? So now we looked at what does this look like by looking at previous price action, just to get an idea of how we need to interpret it. And now we're going to look at how to actually use it.